Welcome back and thanks for staying with the SABC News channel. Of course, speculation has gone into overdrive as negotiations around a government of national unity continue behind closed doors. And I suppose the latest development in this ongoing story is the president issuing a notice for a joint meeting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces planned for the 18th of July. Is this perhaps a sign of light at the end of the tunnel? Let's continue making sense of what we know and perhaps what we don't know. Bring in now our guest, political analyst Sanusha Naidu, who joins us via our telephone line this morning. Sanusha, it's great to have you on the SABC. Thanks very much indeed for making time to speak to us. Of course, much of the talk this morning is around those leaked letters that emerged really from yesterday afternoon well into the evening. The president seemingly drawing a line in the sand with John Steenhuisen, who represents the Democratic Alliance, when it comes to what they're asking for and what he's willing to concede to. Let me just begin with the broad question around what you make of the leaks and perhaps the contents of those letters.
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to the viewers. Apologies for sounding quite hoarse and sick. I think the challenge right now is nobody knows what is really going on behind closed doors. There's a lot of issues that are being debated in the media. The leaked letters, as we see them, shows a very tenuous, a very tense, a very uncomfortable set of negotiations that are happening. They're awkward, and nobody actually said that they were going to be easy. And I think that was the real context and the architecture of what a GNU in the current political climate would be like, because again, it tells you that the electoral mandate hasn't been for a single party to get a majority in terms of the election outcomes. So right now where we're sitting with a lot of information that's being distilled through public spaces, media, social media platforms, and of course just hearing things anecdotally. But that doesn't give us a sense of what's really going on. And I think that makes it even more difficult to gauge to what level of the negotiations we are seeing happen. I think the kind of trajectory that these negotiations have taken with regard to how this has now played out as a kind of level of brinkmanship with the leaking of the letters and using that as a kind of leverage in terms of going back into negotiations and discussions and so forth. And we hear as of this morning that sometime soon, again, this question of soon, no definite time frame, but sometime soon we'll have a government of national unity. We don't know what's conjecture, what's really happening. And I think right now, all South Africans are probably feeling, perhaps I should not say all South Africans, I as a South African feeling very frustrated, not sure where we are right now. But really, I think the people that have been tasked with this and say that they are talking and listening to the mandate of the electorate should start becoming much more engaged around finding that level of trust in order to form this government of national unity. Yeah,
you know, we've made a reference a lot to 1994 as we try, I suppose, wrap our heads around what this GNU might look like. And, you know, at the time, the situation was obviously very different, not only when you consider what was taking place politically, but just the ways in which we get information. I can't imagine, for example, the apartheid government and, you know, the ANC sitting and trying to come up with a deal during an era of social media where whatever is decided at any turning point could make it to the public and possibly derail those talks, dare I say. To what extent do you reckon that complicates where we are at the moment? The fact that social media is so ubiquitous and in fact, you know, there are so many voices chiming in at every turn.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It adds that a layer of complexity. It adds a layer of difficulty and challenges because you're also not sure, in a sense, in terms of what's coming out as possible information, how verifiable it is, because everybody wants to feel that they have a source that is one step closer to the negotiations than the other, whether it's a media house or a person that's on Twitter or social media spaces, and I still call it Twitter, tells you how archaic I am. But the point I'm trying to say is that none of us with any level of surety or knowledge that tells us that who we are speaking to gives us that sense of, like, you know what, this is really the information that's coming out. And I think it makes it, the speculation makes it even more uncomfortable, because at the moment there's a lot of noise happening, chatter happening about, you know, who is right, who is wrong, who actually should actually be given the kind of portfolios. There's a lot of questions being raised, a lot of anger being shown, and frustration and challenges that are being put out on the public space. And right now, I think there's a need to basically, I don't know how you block yourself out of it, but I think there has to be a need to create a kind of blockage and a blockout of that, because that will then kind of get the two main negotiations, but also the other political parties that are part of the GNU, to start thinking much more about where we need to be as a government going forward. The other thing to note is I would be more cautious to say that this is the GNU that we need to look at from 1994. Remember, the GNU of 1994 comes under particular circumstances, structural conditions, and therefore it is not necessarily only about bringing in the strategic actors or opening up an invitation, but it's also about understanding that this time around there has to be a level of consensus as well, not just in determining the cabinet portfolios and who gets what, but also working together in terms of where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I know that social media can be made up of echo chambers, but a lot of the sentiment I've seen as people react to these letters is, at least at the level of perception, people wondering whether the DA is asking for a bit too much. And I don't know how you measure that, quite frankly. I've never been in a situation where I've needed to negotiate a government of national unity, so to speak. But I do wonder whether there is a way, a neutral way of measuring how far any of these organizations can push, given the fact that we're really building this plane as we fly it, aren't we?
Absolutely, and it's a lot about finding your traction, finding where you're actually going to be able to work in a kind of consensus, work in terms of not just the fact that it's about building the GNU, it's also about working with the bureaucracy that is there. And I think what has also been quite disturbing is the fact that it seems to me that there's a sense that if one of the parties doesn't want to go forward, then we can essentially bring this whole process down to how the markets will react. The markets is one set of actors in this, but I think also what is important here is the maturity to understand that where you are. Yes, we understand it's about the electoral outcomes and the broad proportionality of cabinet posts and stuff like that. But I think the first order of business is, let's get this GNU up and running. Let's get the working relationship of the cabinet moving towards that cabinet meeting that happens before the parliament address that is now being scheduled for July 18th. And I think this will actually make us feel a little bit more confident, because this level of engagement also doesn't instill the confidence that even if you do manage to find a way to break the deadlock or to negotiate around these cabinet positions, the question will always remain, is the fragility of the GNU is almost on that knife edge all the time. And how confident are you going forward? So there's a number of different moving parts that need to come together.
Yeah, you know, the president has obviously been described in several ways since his letter was leaked, and I think it's important to also emphasize that this is a letter that was dated the 24th of June, so that was, what, Tuesday? The situation may have changed dramatically since then. Nonetheless, I mean, the language he uses in that letter is quite telling, right? I mean, he describes Helen Zille's correspondence as offensive and condescending, seemingly drawing a line in the sand insofar as how much he's willing to concede. We also know the president has had experience when it comes to this. You know, he's among the people who were told we're at the forefront of negotiations as we're transitioning into our democracy. It's a reminder of the type of politician Cyril Ramaphosa can be.
Indeed, and I think it's also important to bear in mind that this is something that not only that he has the experience in, but I think it's also breaking ground for other political parties that are here now in terms of how they look at this process going forward. I mean, do they actually then convene all of the party leaders to come together that make up the GNU as we see it now as a structure and say, like, you know what, here's a deadlock, how do we move forward? But I think it's also beyond that, because it's important for us to bear in mind that a negotiation is never fully done. It's a constant work in progress. And so there'll always be that level of where do you find the need to start thinking about what are the issues? Where are you putting things first? And I think that the negotiators right now should be, and I suspect President Ramaphosa is, when you listen to his inaugural address at his inauguration 2 weeks ago, it's always reminding us about the mandate that the electorate has given political parties. And I think that constantly becomes an important underpinning to what this whole thing is about. And so I think the challenge right now for all of them is to be able to find that level of engagement. It's about understanding that it's not about you, it's about the greater good and the public interest of the country.
Without a doubt. And as we speak, I see correspondence that the IFP is now calling a media briefing this afternoon to speak about the uncertainty that you and I in some ways have ventilated. But I guess, Sanusha, we'll all wait and see how it all unfolds. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We appreciate your time here on the SABC. Sanusha Naidu, a political analyst. The wait continues, of course. Hopefully we'll have some kind of announcement rather sooner than later.